Hey there, welcome to Blender Gunpla. This is a video series where I'm looking at how we could use Blender to design custom 3D printable add-on parts for our Gunpla kits. And we've been on a bit of a hiatus, but we're back today, and we're gonna start working on this kit here. It's a pretty simple high-grade Zaku kit, and I just picked it up at the store the other day, and I haven't obviously built it yet, but I did cut two parts off the runners, and here they are. And this is where we're going to start today. This is the shield that goes on the shoulder of the Zaku, and it's quite simple. And this big flat surface here is something that I would like to add some detail to. So I've drawn here in pencil kind of an idea of what I have in mind for a raised panel piece that will fit over the top of this. It'll probably extend over the edges of the part on all three of these areas here where it kind of runs into the edge so that it fits over the top and provides a little bit of a raised detail diagonal kind of stripe here, and then an area up here where we could put maybe an insignia or something like that for the mobile suit that we're building. So what we're going to look at over the next couple of episodes is how I would design this part from scratch. And the first phase of that, which is what we're going to do today, is the basic kind of overall structure of the part. I'm not going to add a lot of detail or little embellishments to it just yet. We're just going to build the basic structure, and then we're going to actually 3D print it and make sure that it fits here on the shield correctly before we continue on with adding some other details to it in later episodes. So without any further ado, let's run the intro and then jump into it. All right, so here we are in a brand new empty Blender file. And let's get started by creating a reference object for that shield that we want to place this part over the top of. Now, I've actually taken my digital calipers and measured the physical piece itself, so I know its measurements. And so we can add a cube here, and we'll just edit the dimensions of this cube to match up with my measurements. Just as a side note, I've added a little bit of padding to these measurements. So I know I want it to be 15.2 millimeters wide and 46 millimeters long. So we'll have to zoom out a bit to see the whole thing. And then 4.4 millimeters thick. So I typically add somewhere between 1/10 and 2/10 of a millimeter of padding to the measurements that I take. In this case, since we're fitting a part over the top of this shield, I've added that padding into the measurements to make this reference piece a little bit bigger than it actually is in real life. If I was fitting something inside of a shape or a cavity, I would subtract that padding from those measurements so that I'm sure that my piece will fit inside of there. So that's something that you'll have to probably experiment a bit with depending on your printer. The actual amount of padding that you need to use might be a little bit different. But this should work okay for mine. And so now that we've got this shape, I'm gonna go ahead and Control A and apply that scale. That's a good practice to be in anytime that you manually edit dimensions of things so that your scale goes back to being 1.0 everywhere. And then the other thing I wanna do with this reference object is, you can see here it's kind of on the Z-axis, the zero plane here of the Z, the grid that we see here is kind of hitting it halfway up. I would actually like it to be sitting just below the Z-axis so that the pieces that we design can be at Z equals 0 and be sitting right on top of it. And so I'm gonna move that in the Z direction by, I guess, half of its thickness. So that'd be 2.2 in the negative direction, right? So now it's down there sitting level with the Z-axis plane. And so that is our basic shape that we're trying to fit something over the top of. And let's go into the top view here and go ahead and try to start sketching out the shape that I had drawn in pencil on that piece. So I'm going to go here to the ND menu, and I'm going to start a sketch with a single vertex. It creates it there at the origin, and I can move it. I'm going to hold down Control here to snap to the grid. Now each one of these large grid squares here is 1 millimeter, and so we can use that to kind of gauge how big things are going to be. And I want this to hang over the edge of the shield, and I found through practice that probably a thickness of at least 1 millimeter is good here for this surface that's going to be hanging over the edge. Anything narrower than that isn't going to print well. It might warp a little bit or just not be sturdy enough for us to be able to handle and work with. So I'm going to put this first point maybe right about here. So that's actually going to be, looks like about 1.3 millimeters off of the edge here, but that's good enough for what we want to do here. Then I'm going to extrude this in the X direction straight over this way. Again, I'm going to snap it to the grid. Maybe I want it to come out about this far. Yeah, let's go, or all the way over to here maybe. Yeah, we'll come all the way over here. We'll make it a little bit thicker. We'll err on the side of wider edges here. So then we'll extrude this in the Y direction down straight this way, probably to just a little bit above the midpoint of the shield, maybe about right there. And then we'll make this angle that I had drawn out. Now I could bring this all the way out over the edge because I do want it eventually to be over the edge, but I think coming out at an angle like that would be strange. So I'm gonna come down to about here, and then we'll take another line straight this way to go out over the edge. And then we got to figure out how thick we want this piece to be. So again, each one of these squares is 1 millimeter. So we can go 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe about 5. Yeah, so we'll make it about 5 millimeters wide here, this stripe. Then I'm going to pull this one back to about there. And I'm going to try to follow this angle up this way. So to about there. Then we'll go just in the Y direction this way. And again, we want this to be the same thickness. So we'll go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we'll extrude it straight out this way. And then we'll do our Shift 2 and say make manifold, so that'll fill that in. So this is kind of the first shape that we want to create. And you see here it's flat and it's sitting right on top of the surface of that shield. So if you've watched past episodes of Blender Gunpla, you probably will think, oh, now what I normally do is I create this sketch and then I use the solidify modifier, which is right here, to give it some thickness, right? So I'll do that here and then I'll explain to you why that actually doesn't work for what we want to do this time. So I'll go ahead and lock that thickness in. Now, my next thing that I was going to want to do is to put some bevels on some of the edges of this shape, not necessarily all of them, but like this bottom edge where it meets down here with the shield, I would like to kind of have an angled edge down there. Same thing over here on this side. And so if I do that, right, if I tab into here and I see what geometry we have to work with, we could select this edge here and we could put an edge bevel on it. So let's do that. And I'll drag this up. And I'll even make it even bigger here so that we can see what's happening, right? And I'll zoom in here. So I wanted this bevel down here on this bottom edge, but I didn't want it up here at the top. I want this to remain fairly flat. I just want to put bevels around here where this meets up with the side of the shield. But because both of these are controlled by this one edge, because they come from the solidification of just this flat shape, there's not an easy way for us to create that bevel down here without also affecting something up there. And so there's a couple things we could do there. I'm going to back out of all of those changes. We could take this solidify modifier and apply it, which then makes it into 3D geometry and gives us the control we need. But if I know I'm going to do that anyway, what I tend to just want to do instead when I start out with a flat shape like this is just tab into edit mode and select this one face and just hit E and extrude it, right? And this way I have control over how thick I want this to be because I can type a number. So I want it to be probably 4 millimeters thick, so roughly the same thickness as the shield piece itself. And if I lock that in, then we can see that, well, some of it's now inside the shield, but we can see that I have a lot more points and edges to work with. So this edge up here is separate from this edge down here as far as Blender is concerned, and I can add bevels to those separately. And so we will do that in just a second, but first I'm going to move this in the Z direction probably by about 1 millimeter up. So in a similar way to it's hanging off this edge by about 1 millimeter, I think we decided it was probably more like 1.3. This distance right here over the edge, we're also going to have it extend up above the surface of the shield by exactly 1 millimeter. So that gives us a nice kind of shape like this all the way around. And now that we've done that, we can go in and make those beveled edges that I was looking for. So I'm going to start with actually all of these. So I want those two and this one here and probably this one here as well. And then we'll go to the opposite side over here and grab all of those same edges. So these and this one. And let me get you a good view here of this as we hit Shift 2 and we go and we put an edge bevel on these, right? So I'm going to drag this up, and by default, you can see there on where it says width, it's 500, which is 0.5 millimeter. I would like that to be quite a lot larger, so I'm going to hold Control and Alt and type in, let's say 1500, so 1.5. That's probably too much. Let's go with 1 millimeter. Yeah, I like how that's looking. I typed 1100. Let's fix that. So exactly 1 millimeter. There we go. And lock that in. So now we have this beveled edge down here where it meets the shield, and that's happening on both sides. But the top here is still nice and sharp edged. And that's the shape I was after. Now, in real life, sharp edges aren't really infinitely perfectly sharp, and they are right now on our Blender object that we've created. If you look even at the shield, the molded plastic that we have that came off the runner, those edges have a slight roundedness to them. And so just to mimic that and to make the part a little bit easier to work with as we go forward, I'm going to also add an overall bevel to the entire piece. And I'm gonna do just a very small amount. So nothing big like that, because that would be, you know, way too much, more than what we're after. I'm thinking maybe about 150, which is 0.15 of a millimeter. And then instead of making it a chamfer, which is a bevel with just one segment like this so that it's a straight line, I'm gonna hold down the Alt key here and adjust the number of segments up to like maybe 4 is probably fine. So then we end up with this nice sort of rounded edge here, and it did it all the way around the part, even down here on top of the larger bevel that we created. And that'll, you know, just give us some slightly rounded edges on our final printed piece and make it just seem a little bit more polished and finished. Now, one thing you might notice after you add that bevel, if you look really closely, and I'm not sure if the video will produce this well or not, but in Blender, it gets a little confused about the shading. So there's like a little edge kind of right here that you see, and a little edge right here. And those aren't blemishes in your part itself. Your 3D model is fine. This is just how Blender is choosing to figure out the shading when it renders this thing. And a way to fix it real quickly, if you notice that sort of thing and it's bugging you, like again, once you export this and print it, it'll be fine. But just for the shading purposes, you can right click when you have that object selected and choose shade flat here, and that fixes all of that shading. So now this looks more like what you would expect it to look like. So anyway, now we have this piece, and that looks pretty good and pretty close to what I had drawn with my pencil drawing. Let's go again into the top view, and we'll draw a second bit to be that insignia kind of frame area over here. So again, I'm going to hold down Shift 2, I'm going to go to Sketch, I'm going to choose Single Vertex. It's going to create the vertex here on the origin point. And if I start to move this around, you'll see it kind of disappears. That's because it's sitting at Z equals 0, so just on the top surface of the shield part, and it's going behind this over here. So before we start moving that, I'm going to hit Alt-Z to turn this into, you know, sort of an X-ray mode so that we can kind of see through and see what we're doing here as we move this around. So again, I'm going to hold down Control. I'm going to, I think, probably start this up here at right about there. We're going to extrude it over this way. I want it to hang off the edge of the shield a little bit further, so we'll go 1 millimeter extra from what we did down here. We'll extrude it again down this way, make it, I don't know, this big, something about like that seems fine. And then like this, and then we'll again make manifold to close it off. I can hit Alt-Z again now to make this back solid again, and now we have this rectangle just sitting on top of here. And we could have created that by creating a plane instead of a sketch, but I'm just used to using the ND tools and creating a sketch. Just like what we did with the last one, we're going to extrude this, and I'm gonna go, let's say 6 millimeters this time. So I want it to be quite a bit thicker than the other one. The idea is that after we move it up, so that it's about even here, it will be sticking up even further out off of the surface of the shield up here. So let's actually do that right now. Let's move it in the Z direction, and we'll do this one sort of manually. And I'm going to rotate here and get myself a better angle. I want it to be just above, so that's actually close to what I had in mind. I want it to be just barely above the back surface of that shield piece, just like that. And then up here on top, just taking a quick look, that gives us, you know, it sticks up above this by slightly less, maybe about half as much as what this is above the shield. And that seems like it looks pretty good from my point of view here. So that's nice. And then we'll do the same thing we did before. So we're gonna select these corners here, I think, to bevel, because I want a nice big bevel on those. And then down here at this bottom edge, I don't think I'm gonna bevel this off like I did over here. I think I'm gonna leave it straight so that it's going all the way down and just kind of ending flat down there. We'll see how that looks. We'll go ahead and do this bevel first, and we can always add those if we need to later on. So we'll go to our edge bevel, and we will make this, again, by default, it wants to go at 0.5 millimeter. I'm gonna hold down Control and Alt and type in, let's say 2000, so it's 2 millimeters. And just looking at that, that looks kind of like what I had in mind. So we'll go with that. And see what this looks like. So yeah, that looks pretty good. I like this big surface back here. Maybe we'll add some additional detail onto that later, being a big flat surface like that. So that seems good. I like that. Again, we'll select this whole thing and we'll put that same overall bevel onto it. Was it, I think it was 150, so 1.5 millimeters, and then we went with 4 segments. So we'll do that there. So 150 and 4. We could check, if we want to double check what we did over here, you can just go back into that bevel modifier and it'll show you what you had done. So that was 150 and 4. So yeah, the two are matching. Again, you might want to, this one doesn't look like the shading got too confused, but we can select that and choose shade flat just to make sure that the shading is good. And now we have basically the shape that I was after. So I'm pretty happy with this overall. And this is kind of the end of that first phase of just blocking out the basic shape. We haven't added any fancy details or anything to it yet, and we'll do that at some point. But before we do that, I think I want to go ahead and print this out and see what it looks like in my hand, and also make sure that it fits on the shield well. So before we print it, let's actually combine these two things together. So I'm going to select both of these objects. I'm going to go Shift 2, and in the ND menu under Booleans, we can do a union. So that combines those two objects together. It actually adds a little weird wireframe outline around one of them, and you can hide that over here by just clicking the eyeball on the util object that it created. So now that we have that, that's good. And then let's subtract this shield piece out from those to make, you know, the correct shape. So we select this, we're gonna shift and select that. So we've selected our two objects. The second object you select in this case with a difference modifier is the one that you're kind of keeping and cutting away from. So we go Shift 2, we go to Booleans, we go to difference, and now that cuts that shield out of there and leaves this part here that should fit right over the top of our shield, as long as we've measured everything correctly, right? So this is a good place now to maybe save your work before you go to make any other modifications. In my case here, what I'm gonna do is go ahead and export this as an STL and then send it over to my printer. And I'll be back in just a minute after that finishes printing. Well, it'll be several minutes for me, but right away for you. And we'll see how that fits onto our shield part, and then talk a little bit about what we might want to do with it in the next episode. Okay, so here we are. This is the part. I've just taken it off of the 3D printer, and I did cure it, and I actually sanded the backside because I had the supports down here, so I wanted to make sure this was nice and smooth for our test fit. And so here's the moment of truth. Here's our shield with my sketched idea on it, and we'll see how this fits over the top of here. Yeah, that actually fits quite well. So our tolerance is good there. This seems good. The angle of this doesn't quite match up with my original sketch I had it more of an angle this way, but I like how that's fitting and how it looks. So yeah, overall I'm happy with this. Like I said, I'd like to have some sort of probably a sunken in insignia on here, something that we could potentially reverse wash if we were painting this later on. So we'll definitely add that in the next episode. And then we'll talk about some kind of secondary details. Maybe this needs a few more additional pieces maybe sticking off of it somewhere. And then after that, then I do the tertiary details, which are the small things like little rivets or maybe some panel lines inside of these surfaces and that sort of thing. So probably 2 more stages of this, one for the secondary kind of larger details, and then a second episode after that for the tertiary small details that will finish the part up. But overall, I'm happy with how this came out so far. If you've been following along, give this a try, maybe print out a part for yourself, and maybe not on this Zaku shield, but on something else that's a large flat surface. See if you can get your fit to be right and your basic structure of your idea to be there. And then I'll see you next time, and we will add some additional details onto this part. See you then.